Joining us now, the man that was standing to the president's right yesterday, Bob Lighthizer. If you watched any of that Rose Garden event, it was terrific. And Lighthizer is the U.S. trade representative. Bob is just one of the smartest people out there on trade negotiations, trade litigation. He was the perfect person to put in charge of this, and he joins us now. Bob, it's great to talk to you. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Laura. How are you? Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys, looks like you had fun yesterday in the Rose Garden. It was a fun day.
It was wild. It was like 90 minutes. Of course, it got a little off track with all this Kavanaugh business.
Yeah,
but
you thought you were talking about. Yeah, you thought you were talking about Chapter 19, and then you ended up talking about
exactly.
Kavanaugh.
So at the end of it, everybody up on the podium, which was, several cabinet members, but also the great members of, professional staff at USTR who were just terrific people, have been working around the clock for months on this. Everybody had sort of locks in their knees and kind of stumbled off. And just one other funny thing, the people on the president's left up in the corner were all sort of sunburned on one side of their face. I mean, those of us in the shade, it wasn't a problem, but it was wild. It was fun. It was a fun time and kind of a reward for my people working so hard to get something very important for the country done.
So it probably doesn't surprise you that the Wall Street Journal today, this is like on cue, their lead editorial, a new NAFTA relief is the title, and the New Deal is worse than the status quo, but disaster was avoided. And it's very specific criticisms, but your reaction to the naysayers who are out there saying that, well, you're stripping protections against predatory government behavior for most foreign investors. The New Deal also takes a giant step toward politically managed trade by imposing new rules of origin, labor regs. I'll let you tee off on a couple of those.
Well, I don't want to specifically focus on the Wall Street Journal. They've been sort of against the idea of changing NAFTA from the beginning. You have to start with the position, was NAFTA in its current state good or bad? Well, we have large deficits. Everyone would agree it was 25 years out of date. There was no internet. Christ, we had cell phones the size of hats when this thing went into effect, and people would suggest don't upgrade it as crazy. And then, in addition to changes in the economy, we had very large deficits. And we were witnessing literally the loss of our automobile industry, parts and companies to Mexico and to other places. So the people who say we shouldn't have renegotiated this thing are just engaging in self-deception. And I might note that both Secretary Clinton and President Obama, both when they ran for president, promised they would renegotiate it. They just didn't do it in the final analysis, but they both acknowledged that it needed to be redone. So what the president did, which I think was terrific, is we have by far the biggest trade block in history, $1.2 trillion, and we've now rewritten the rules in ways that are better, quite frankly, for all three countries, particularly better for America, because that's who pays my bills and who I care about, and better in a whole variety of ways. It's the auto rules of origin are extremely important in terms of making sure that manufacturing moves back to America and stays in America. There is a sunset provision that is going to make sure we review this on a periodic basis. We call it a review provision. There are labor rights which have never been like this ever in an agreement before. There's access on agriculture. There's a whole, and then you move into the next step of things like digital trade and intellectual property protection and financial services, all these 21st century economy kinds of things. There were no adequate rules, and now we have them. There's even very good rules on the environment, which are beyond anything we've negotiated before, which I'm proud of. There's very strong and enforceable rules on currency, which we've never had in a trade agreement before. There are limitations on data localization, which is an important thing for the digital trade people. We have limitations on how state-owned enterprises which is you think China can subsidize. So there's a whole variety of things in various buckets. It's an extremely important agreement, better than anything the United States has ever negotiated before. It's going to make a real difference for working men and women in this country. Now, some businesses and some Wall Street guys will have to figure out another way to make a fortune, but in terms of working men and women and farmers and ranchers, it's going to make a big difference. And it's going to be, this is the President Trump trade prototype, and we're going to use it going forward with countries around the world. So it's really, really an important day.
We're talking to Bob Lighthizer, U.S. Trade Rep, one of the chief, of course, negotiators in getting us to this new U.S., Mexico, Canada agreement. Bob, one of the things that we're wondering is how this works in a still Republican majority Congress. Could this, what's the mechanism for this passing? Well, there are some Republicans supporting it, some probably won't, but more Democrats would support this than Republicans, correct?
Well, I would not say that. I think you're going to find Republicans and Democrats both support it, hopefully strongly. There are a few Republicans who will probably oppose it because they don't like the fact that we're going to bring manufacturing back, and they think that outsourcing is not a problem. There are some Democrats that will oppose it in part because it's just something that the president wants, and they're against that, or they think it doesn't go far enough. But I think the vast majority of fair-minded members in both parties will support this. Now, one of the criticisms you have, which is sort of an odd one in the Wall Street Journal, is they have this view that, well, we never should have talked to labor unions and Democrats when we put it together. And then they draw the conclusion that for that it's worse for us if the Democrats should take over. And of course, the exact opposite is true. We designed this to be bipartisan for working men and women and farmers and ranchers. It's not something I believe it's going to end up being purely partisan. And if it is a kind of thing that can only be passed with Republican votes, if that's what we had negotiated, then I would agree with the people who say it would have trouble passing. But that's not how it was designed, and it's not what we did.
This is what John Harwood from CNBC said, specifically regarding autos. Let's listen.
There are some elements of managed trade in it that are less free. That is to say, the provisions for the auto industry, if those provisions work, it means our cars will get more expensive for U.S. consumers, but there's also a chance that they're complicated enough that they won't be worth it for automakers to comply, which means that the president's statement about a new dawn for the auto industry, that is almost certainly not correct.
Your reaction?
Well,
to that,
I guess if I had to make one word, it would be nonsense. You wonder about people who make statements like that. They're so palpably crazy, and you wonder what else they're saying that is also crazy. So just to give you an idea, all the major auto companies, General Motors, Ford, FCA, which used to be Chrysler, Honda, and Toyota, have all said this is fine. They can work with this. They've all said it's going to move more jobs back to America, but that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. They've all said it's workable. They've all endorsed it. So the kind of people who don't know very much about what's going on and make those kind of wild statements, I would just take them to sort of sit down and loosen their belt and their tie and breathe 10 times and then just read something about it, and they'll realize how they don't know what they're talking about. This is going to be really very, very important for American manufacturing. It's going to bring a lot of jobs back. And by the way, it's not bad for Mexico or for Canada either. It'll help them too. The biggest single thing we do, let me just give you an idea. Well, the biggest thing we do, or one of the two biggest things we do, one is we increase the content of cars that are sold in America and Mexico and Canada, but sold in America. The content that is made in this region is increasing. Right now, we say it's 62%. It's really more like about 50 because of loopholes and all this special interest stuff. We're going to raise it up to 75%. How is that a bad thing? The person who's going to lose out on this is China and places like that. under the TPP that these people all endorsed, half the car could be made in China and sold in America duty-free. It's completely lunacy. The people don't know what they're talking about. The other thing is we're requiring that a certain percent of the car be made in a high-wage area, that is to say, in America. Now, it could be Canada also, but in America for the most part. That's not a bad thing at all. Why shouldn't we say, if we're going to give you the benefit of selling cars into our market with no duties, better than we treat anyone else in the world, why shouldn't we say that a certain amount of those cars should be made in America by American labor?
Well, I think it's what President Trump promised on the campaign trail. He promised, he delivered. Bob Lighthizer, USTR, what's next? I mean, are you guys going to get a deal done with Europe, some of the European countries, bilat deals with Switzerland or some of these other smaller countries? I know Swiss are anxious to do a deal with you guys. I know that firsthand.
Yeah, no, we have a variety of things that we're talking to the Japanese, we're talking to the Europeans. We have a lot of things that we're doing, small deals. I call them singles and doubles that people don't even know about. We're talking. I won't go through them, but there's a bunch of other countries doing it. And then, of course, the big elephant in the room is China. And one of the funny things, I'll tell you just one last time on the Wall Street Journal editorial, because you brought it up, they kind of show a graph of the American S&P, and then they mark certain things to sort of say, oh, look, this was bad for the S&P. What they don't mark is when the president announced his 301, which was like in March. Since then, the market's gone straight up. When the president put on tariffs on China,
intellectual property,
$50 billion, and then for intellectual property theft and forced technology transfer, the market's gone straight up from them. I was kind of laughing. This is like one of these things where you've got 10 data points. Let's drop out the 5 that prove the opposite, and then put the other ones on. You should look at it. I ask any of your listeners to look at the thing if they happen to have the. Hopefully,
I'm actually looking at it now. Yeah, January 22nd, March 8th, July 1st, June 25th, and August 27th.
Yeah. Now just look at the points. Put at the bottom. Just show where the China actions are. The market's like straight up from there, right? I mean, it's hilarious, right?
Bob, I'm just glad today that I know without prompting what the 301 means. Like, how many people know that other than you geeks, trade geeks?
I should be careful. I should be careful. We all follow these sort of jargon and these shorthands. We have a statute that allows the president to take action when somebody does something that's unfair or discriminatory and hurts America. And we did an 8-month study, and we found that China was stealing our technology and forcing our companies to give them technology without being paid, and the president took action. And the result of that has been really, really very strong and very important, not only for the economy now, but for the future. We are an innovative country. If we can't protect innovation, we lose our edge. And one other thing I would say, Laura, when you really look at how this sort of total change in how we think and talk and act about trade, that's all brought on by the president. And what I said yesterday, and I firmly believe it's a question of both his vision but his grit. Nobody else has I don't hear this word grit enough about the man. No one else has enough grit to stand up to all these people that are complaining about what we're doing and then stick up for Americans, farmers and ranchers and workers.
No, it's fantastic, Bob. Congratulations. Bob Lighthizer here on the Laura Ingraham Show. Onward to the next trade challenge, and slowly but surely, these huge milestones being achieved. The U.S. Trade Representative Bob Lighthizer here on your Healthy Radio Addiction. We'll get your calls on Kavanaugh and where we are now with this vote count. Collins now says she would like an expansion of the FBI background check to include this Julie Swetnick. By all accounts, she's been completely exposed, changing memories. We'll get to that when we come back. Thanks for listening to this podcast excerpt of The Laura Ingraham Show. If you'd like to receive podcasts of our complete shows, go to lauraingraham.com and sign up to become a member of Laura 365. Our Laura 365 members get commercial-free streams and podcasts of our shows every day we're on the air. And also, you can listen to the last 30 days of The Laura Ingraham Show. Be ahead of the curve. Join Laura 365.